keeping all of those energy stores and still firing the adrenaline and firing the cortisol, which absolutely has like a full body impact on multiple systems. And I do want to touch on the perimenopause because all of nervous system work is like most of the medical industry or anything is very geared towards the male,
Hmm.
right? Like they are less complex physiologically and easier to study. And so it's just really fascinating as I'm learning and mentoring through Veronica Rotman, who specializes in the female nervous system. And she talks a lot about how our cycle and that rhythm and ritual that comes with it and how it ebbs and flows, and then how society really keeps us at like this steady high pace all of the time, which goes directly against the natural cycle and flow for women.
Welcome to Tried and True with a Dash of Woo, where we blend rock solid tips with a little bit of magic. I'm Renee Bowen, your host, life and business coach, and professional photographer at your service. We are all about getting creative, diving into your business, and playing with manifestation over here. So, are you ready to get inspired and have some fun? Let's dive in. Hey, welcome back to Tried and True with the Dash of Woo. I am Renee, your host. Today's guest on my show is somebody that I am super aligned with, and this conversation is so fire. You guys maybe aren't ready for it. Like, we really go there. Okay, so Kathryn Spears. She is a neurosomatic intelligence practitioner, and she's also the director of marketing and communications at the Neurosomatic Intelligence, which is the leading global institute of neurosomatics. So she specializes in nervous system integration, helping female founders, disruptors, and trailblazers who've done the inner work, the mindset, the manifestation, and the strategy, but they still feel stuck. So they might have built these massive external successful businesses, but inside these same patterns keep repeating. You're coached with me before. You know, I do a lot of this work myself. And what Kathryn does is she helps people basically bridge that gap with precision and integration using cutting edge neuroscience and somatic application to create deep, lasting change. We go super deep into dysregulation, how past experiences shape our ability to show up and be seen. So many topics that you guys have been dealing with and that I hear in my DMs and I see online. So I'm not going to even talk anymore about it. We're just going to dive right in. Enjoy. Hello, Kathryn. Thank you so much for being here. You and I have so much in common. I love everything that you have to say about everything that you do. So I know that my audience is going to just eat all of this up, but I want to start at the very beginning before we kind of dive into all the different things of what you do and how you do it. You left this like, quote unquote dream job in marketing and walked away from it. What was that turning point like? And did you realize something deeper was going on beneath the surface? What was the motivation for that? Because I feel like a lot of women in my audience might be going through something similar, just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I lived the hustle. I was a certified hustler and really did chase that dream. And even though I worked in corporate, like I never felt like it was like that buttoned up suit and tie corporate vibe. I really got to work with some amazing brands. However, I was really trapped in cycles of perfectionism, overachieving, workaholism, and later on realized that that was a trauma response. And it was what was really allowing me to continue to dissociate from my body and face what I needed to be able to like really, I don't want to say heal because I don't ever really think that we're healed. I think what would be the fun in that if we like had a destination and arrived, it's really about the in between, as you go, the twists and the turns of the roads and the journey. And for me, it was just this moment of like, I am doing something that I do not want to be doing. And it was just this moment of like, oh, well, why am I doing that? And this deep knowing that there was something beneath the surface that really needed to be addressed in how it was showing up, like in my body in my health, with my kids, my short fuse. And so that's really what led me to where I am today and, burning down my marketing career.
Wow. That had to be, well, first of all, I mean, liberating and freeing and all those things, but it also had to be really scary. So you obviously had to work through your own trauma responses around that. And you talk a lot about the difference between mindset and nervous system work. So let's get
Mhm.
into that distinction really quick because I also speak about both. And I want to sort of like kind of set the stage for that before we like really dig into all these different pieces and like why mindset alone is not enough.
Absolutely. It's kind of like I always say this I read all the books. I did all the things. I dabbled in, I tried, and I kept what I realize now was having another stress response to the exact stress response I was trying to address. And so I would go into these, like try to meditate, I would flight. And for me, being in my body and being with myself in silence was too much too soon. And that's just so common, especially for like millennial women. Like we were raised from, that generation of like, keep going, push through, pick up, carry on. And a generation that really couldn't carry our emotions or handle our emotions. And so that repression and suppression of our emotions is just such a well-worn path. And so really for me, I tried all of the mindset. And then I realized that 95% of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are run from our subconscious. And then I learned about the nervous system and how it really pulls rank. We are taking in 400 billion pieces of information and it's going through a filtration system that is filtered by our own lived experiences, predictions, biases. And because of this, it's very biased. And so it's pulling rank before we actually even get to the mindset or thinking brain.
Mhm.
And when I figured that out, I was like, oh, because we also get really good at what we practice. And so if we're moving into our survival brain day in and day out, that becomes the default. So we're not able to access, all of the mindset and incredible, personal development books that we may have read. When we work with the nervous system, we're able to get that on board and in sync so that we can activate those areas of the brain and use those incredible tools.
Yeah, it's such a big piece. So many women come to me. I mean, well, actually I work with men too, but most of my clients tend to be women. But in general, I'm sure you hear a lot of that too, is I just can't get out of my own way.
Mhm.
That's kind of the indicator for me that someone is stuck in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever. You know what I mean? Like it definitely, like you said, and I know that millennial women, especially like you mentioned, were raised in that way, but also Gen X. Like I'm Gen X, and
Yeah.
especially not even just Gen X women, like a lot of Gen X men, especially, were taught to just really disassociate and not deal with any of those emotions. And it's so systematic and so generational in a lot of ways, right? So when you decide to do this kind of work, because it is a decision,
Mhm.
and sometimes those decisions are loud and sometimes they're quiet, but when you make that decision to do that, you're really deciding to be very vulnerable and uncomfortable for a bit. And so I think that that is a big piece of it. And you mentioned this in the beginning about like the sitting with it, you know, that is a really powerful place. And if you are having a hard time, because I hear a lot from people when, I always mention like we have a lot of tools in our tool belt. Like there's different ways to sort of do this regulation process. And you kind of have to figure out what works best for you, the person you are, your personality type, human design, whatever.
Yes.
And if you're having a problem though, meditating and you go into instant flight like that, especially, or your go-to is to constantly be chasing the dopamine, whether it's picking up the phone, being distracted, eating, drinking, alcohol, whatever that is. Like there's a lot of different ways that it can show up, but those are little indicators. And a lot of people just kind of, I think, gloss over the fact that, oh, well, that's just life and that's just sort of how we deal with things, but it doesn't have to be. And so when you start looking at all of these things and realizing like, oh, when I'm picking up my phone, I'm really just I'm chasing something. I'm running away from something, one or the other, right? That is a very big indication that there is something more to just that. So I love that you touched on both of those things. And I know you also talk a little bit about like the overthinking and the perfectionism and all of those different ways that it can show up. So, in the work that you do with somatics in particular, what are
Mhm.
some of those strategies that you have seen work for creative women, especially people with spicy brains? Like, that's a big piece of it. Is this ADHD or any kind of neurodiversity that we have on top of all of this?
Yes, I mean, speaking from a neurodivergent, neurospicy human, aka me, I was late diagnosed with ADHD. So I totally get it. And I think the big piece here is in the work that I do, we use applied neurology. So we're working with the brain and the integration of the brain and somatics. So that like body emotional expression. And we're doing it in what we call minimum effective dose. To a lot of people, that may be like titration. And the nervous system is really having its moment on the internet right now.
Mm-hmm.
And women especially can really fall into the trap of, I want to fix myself. I want to fix myself. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. It's like you're like a crow to, the shiny object. I'm speaking from full experience on this, a few years ago, right? It's like, well, what about this? And then what about that? And then what ends up happening is you're really getting the dopamine hit from the searching of how can I heal and how can I fix myself? And it really comes down to, and this is what we really do with neurosomatics, is resourcing ourselves and our capacity at a physiological level in what we call the inputs. And that's like what I call the filtration system. And so our filtration system is like many of our senses, like how we're breathing, what we're seeing, what we're hearing. Are we safe? Do we know where our body is in space? And all of those systems over years of like, not moving a certain way or moving into chronic hyperventilation and poor breathing patterns, which are just so common now. Like we're seeing it in sleep apnea, mouth breathing, like all of these things that are happening as we evolve as humans. They're maladaptive patterns. And what's happening with, I'll use respiration as an example. Every single breath that we're taking is actually an indication to our nervous system we're not safe. So then when we're taking in the information, it's already skewed to we're not safe. So even though that incoming, side glance or email or what have you, it's already painted a picture of we're already not safe. And so instead of working in the outputs with the things like anxiety or overwhelm or perfectionism, we're going back further into the loop into the filtration systems to try to clear those up so that we can create at a physiological level a level of safety. And then what ends up happening is the outputs end up changing because of it. And then it becomes a 360 shift in all of the outputs, which could be chronic pain, it could be behaviors, it could be emotional resilience, you name it.
It's fascinating. I mean,
It
I don't know.
is.
I'm such a geek when it comes to this. I know you are too. So it's like such a fascinating topic to me to think about. I mean, everything is connected. And I mean, I used to be a massage therapist and I went to a very like new agey massage therapy school back in the day. And so we talked a lot about that connection, about the mind and the body and how you might not feel stressed. A lot of people say that, like, well, I don't feel stressed or I don't feel like I should be stressed, right? But their body's in survival mode. And so how can you tell? Like, I know that we talked about breath, which I think is a really, really big piece of it. And I'm a big believer in that myself and something it's top of mind for me all the time. How can you
Mhm.
tell when you're in nervous system dysregulation, even if your mind seems calm? Like, what are some of those things that you see a lot of?
Yeah, I would say it really comes out a lot of like behaviors or pain, like migraines, headaches. You tend to like be more startly, so you'll have that like jumpiness, if you're driving in the car as a passenger and you're like, "Ah!" Overwhelm, anxiety, inner critic, imposter, like those are all protective parts that are kind of showing you opportunities within the nervous system of dysregulation. something for me is something I really need to be careful of because I can be really productive. I'm not actually being productive, but I think I am. But I'm actually jumping from task to task to task with a sense of urgency. So anytime that sense of urgency comes in, like I need to answer this email, or you're in one task and then you're picking up your phone, or you're on your email, then you're moving over to like Instagram to write a social post, then you're back over on Voxer to DM a client or what have you. That like jumping from task to task, that like really urgent, like, oh, well, I need to do this right now is definitely a flag
Okay.
that there is a response going on. And then shoulders up, any tension, any muscle pain, vertigo, dizziness, gut issues, inflammation. Those usually are coming from a chronic stress state that's been firing automatically. The most common, and I tell people over and over again, is they're like, I'm exhausted at the end of the day. And I'm like, yes, because what's actually happening behind the scenes in your body is like a whole chain of events that's frankly exhausting, right?
Yeah. So many of those things show up and we, like I said before, we kind of tend to just like gloss them over and be like, oh, it's just, life living in like a stressful time. I mean, it's just like it's one thing after another, day after day, right? These days. And so I think it's very important now more than ever to be very cognizant of this because it's not just a sign of the times. I don't believe that that's the world's going to world, life is going to life. We can't control all of that. However, I don't really believe that we were meant to live like that. And it is breaking us down physically a lot. I started noticing so many of these things early on, like in my 30s. So many women are also heading into like the perimenopause factor in
Yes,
addition to the neurodiversity. And
absolutely.
then on top of it, like it's getting to be a lot for women in general, especially right now. So what kind of part does that play? Like, obviously, I've been through it. Like, I went through menopause, like actual menopause in my early 40s, like way early. And I know that had a lot to do with all of this. Like, I lived in a dysregulated state for the better part of 20 years, like easily,
Yes,
starting with the birth of my twins. I can trace it back. Like I had 3 kids under the age of 2 and we had twins like right after we had my oldest, and then right after we had twins was we got my older son diagnosed with autism. My husband's an actor. It was like stress, and it just like literally set me on this
path of
really
hyperactive
long
stress
path.
response. Yes.
Yeah. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. My body started shutting down. I gained like a lot of weight. I had a lot of inflammation. Oh, and then because I was just not dealing with any of that, I just started drinking a lot at night and just thinking that that was normal, like to have a glass or 2 or 3 of wine. And that's how I lived for a very long time until a few years ago when I started doing this work. And so I don't know, I just feel like a lot of us get stuck in that. So if somebody's like listening and they're stuck in that and they know like, okay, yeah, you've called out some of my red flags. What does that first step feel like for them? Because I feel like that also can push you into overwhelm and it shut down mode, right? Like, oh my God, it's too much. I can't do it. So I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. And any change is a threat to the brain.
Mhm.
Like that's why habit change is so hard and why willpower alone just isn't enough or mindset isn't enough because the brain, like that's a big energy pull, to make a change. And when you're already in that survival state, it's like, no, 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 we have to preserve our energy for this bear that we're running from,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's not a literal bear, like the brain doesn't discern. And so it's keeping all of those energy stores and still firing the adrenaline and firing the cortisol, which absolutely has like a full body impact on multiple systems. And I do want to touch on the perimenopause because all of nervous system work is like most of the medical industry or anything is very geared towards the male,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they are less complex physiologically and easier to study. And so it's just really fascinating as I'm learning and mentoring through Veronica Rotman, who specializes in the female nervous system. And she talks a lot about how our cycle and that rhythm and ritual that comes with it and how it ebbs and flows, and then how society really keeps us at like this steady high pace all of the time, which
Mhm.
goes directly against the natural cycle and flow for women. And then she talks about how the hormone fluctuations change throughout the cycle. And right before you get your bleed, it's essentially like your window of tolerance is lower. You take zero bullshit.
Yep.
And like that's your report card. And so I was like, huh, I am a rageaholic before I get my period.
Yeah.
But then as I started to lean in and realize like women really need oxytocin, dopamine directly depletes the oxytocin, which we live in a world where like dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. And I started to play with that and also express at a minimum effective dose in a way that felt good for me
Mhm.
somatically. I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, that happened really fast. Like I am not as ragey. Thank goodness. Like my husband and children do not need to hide from me
Yeah.
this cycle, right? And we laugh, and it's like, yes. And I think about so many women, and even my own self, I was on anxiety medication for 15 plus years, and it was quieting that like inner emotional dialogue that I actually just needed to express.
Yeah.
And all of those red flags or symptoms that I was experiencing they were my nervous system trying to communicate with me.
Mhm.
And I'm not anti-medication. Like I needed that medication then. And now I'm in a place where I was able to safely titrate off with, you know, doctors supporting and tools to support. And now I'm like, okay, that's my sign, that's my symptom, that's me talking to me, right? Like those are my white flags before they get to my red flags, which is what would happen before.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just really like we live in a society that tells us to kind of like mute those things, push through, push on, and
Yeah.
it's just such a detriment. I mean, chronic illness is at an all-time high, and yeah.
Yeah, no, your story's so similar to mine too. I've always had anxiety. I didn't realize that's what it was called until
Mm,
I was in my 20s and I had my first panic attack. And then, after years and years, like now I can look back like at my childhood and see, oh yeah, like it was, not it's not really technically quote unquote normal to be awake all night, stressed that your house potentially would catch on fire and
right,
everyone would die. I'm like, oh, not all children did that. You know what I mean? Like,
right,
so, not everybody gets sent home from school on a regular basis because my stomach hurt so bad. They thought I might have stomach cancer as a 17-year-old, but it was really anxiety. Like, oh, that's not normal. So I feel like,
Oh, I
my
can
life.
so relate. I'm like, yeah, I was prescribed antacids at like
Yes.
12,
Yes.
prescription antacids at 12
Mhm.
because I would call home. One year in school, I missed like 75 days of school.
Yeah. They were convinced. My mom was like, something is wrong with you. Like, we have to go see about it. I had to have like upper and lower GI stuff as a 17-year-old, which is terrible and traumatic in and of itself, by the way. But like, you know, she was just worried that I literally had something wrong because I was so sick all the time. Yeah, it was anxiety. And it wasn't until like literally my 40s that I learned how to effectively deal with it. I was also on medication on and off for quite a while. And let me tell you, I needed that medication at that time for
Yeah.
sure. But you're right. My kids were little. I had to like function, right? Like
Yeah,
there
it was do or die, really. It's like do or
really
die. Yeah.
I was like, well, no one else is here to take care of these kids. Like my husband and I both work. We don't have family anywhere close to us. It wasn't like I could just not be a parent that day. Like I had to get it done. And so the medication helped me get it done. I was also in therapy at the time. Like there was a lot of other things going on, but all that to say, you kind of do have to do what you got to do to get through. But I wanted to just touch on that piece. Like if someone is listening and you're dealing with that, those are signals, triggers. They're an invitation to look deeper if you have the capacity. Not everybody has the capacity at that moment. I really am a big believer that our timing is perfect. We're going to find what we need to find when we're meant to find it. But if you are like struggling with things like that and you're having to deal with all of it and you are doing these protocols that are helping because you need to, that's okay. And also you can still do this work at the level that feels safe for you. And
Mhm.
the more you open up to it, the more you will open up as well,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
good.
Safety begets safety, truly.
Mm-hmm.
It's like safety capacity, safety capacity, safety capacity. And then it's just like you can see so clearly,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not in that narrow fog anymore.
Yeah, you like take the little steps. Like it's okay to take
Mhm.
those steps. Like for me, one of the reasons why I was finally able to also wean off of medication years ago is because I started doing really deep work on this. And it took a while. It doesn't always have to, but for me, it did. And that's okay. You know what I mean? Like everyone has their own timeline. And for lots of reasons, that's just sort of kind of where I was. But the thing that is important, I think, to hear is that there are these options. There is an opportunity for you to really, and like you said, not necessarily use the word heal as an endpoint, but healing as a journey, I think is really important because it is a step forward. It is a step in a direction where you want to go. I'm always talking about, your unconscious mind really just wants to run the show because it's survival, it's keeping you safe. It literally only wants to keep you alive. It's its only job. And so it's our job to decide, okay, I'm going to step into the driver's seat. You're going to get in the back seat. We're going to work through this. But it is a decision and you have to be intentional and aware of it. So what are some of these things that we can do to interrupt these patterns that might be a good starting point for somebody, basically?
Yeah, there's so many, and I always kind of like tailor it to the human, with measurement. So we can measure our nervous system and give it an input or like a tool or a strategy, and then measure again. And a really great and simple way to do that is literally like looking left and right. And the reason that is because when you then do a tool, so say I say, like, let's do a visual reset where you cup your hands over your eyes for 30 seconds to a minute. And then after you do that, you take a regulated breath and then you look right and left again. If your range of motion is more, like if you can have more range of motion, that means it's a really positive tool for you. And the reason that is, and the reason that we use range of motion is because A, we're moving beyond feelings, which is in our logical cognitive thinking brain, where our subconscious patterns come into play, like people pleasing and fawning, like, oh yeah, that feels great, which is what I said all the time in therapy. When really it didn't. And so when we have more range of motion, it means we're less braced because when we move into a stress response, the first thing we do is brace. So we have more tension, which equals less range of motion. So it's a really great way to kind of like test your own tools and, do away with the ones that are either negative or neutral and just stick with the ones that give you a positive range of motion because those are the ones that are telling your nervous system and giving signal, I am safe. Anything that's negative or neutral is not going to make a change for you.
That's a good point. That's so interesting too. Like I also heard you, I want to kind of like touch on just a little bit about, yeah, we're talking about doing the inner work, obviously for the benefit of the person. But you've said before, I know I've heard you say things like when women regulate their nervous systems, it changes our culture because we are also so highly affected by not just our families of origin and the ways that we were brought up, but like the culture in general around us. So what does that ripple effect look like? Because that to me is a really awesome conversation to have because a lot of women will not do this work. They will, choose to not do this work because it feels selfish, which is also programming, but all kinds of that stuff, right? But you can reframe that because when you look outward and you start to realize, oh, by me doing this work, it is therefore going to do X, Y, and Z for everyone around me. What does that ripple effect look like? Let's go there for a minute.
Oh, this one, like I can feel it in my heart. Like I'm so passionate about this because one person can make such a massive impact because that one human brings their regulated self to every conversation. I can now sit with my 13-year-old daughter at 10 p.m. on a school night who's, had a friend body shamed that day and she's feeling the impact of that and meeting her there, where before I wouldn't have had the capacity at 10 p.m. to do that and have those in-depth conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I can also have those conversations from a place that I'm not actually projecting my own wounds from my own childhood bullying, which used to come into play in the conversations because my own fight would come in. I'd be like, why is that kid saying that? Like, they can't say those things to you. Like, don't take that, right?
Yep.
And that's totally counterproductive. It overshadows the entire experience. It doesn't allow my kids to feel safe and seen and move through their own emotions in that moment. Instead, my own wounds and projections are projecting onto them. So I can see it in my kids, and how they even carry themselves throughout the world. My daughter shared with me the other day, and like I might get emotional about it, but there was a child by herself on the playground, and her and her friend said, "Hey, let's go see if she's okay." And the child was really upset, and my daughter said, "Do you need a hug?" And she hugged her, and she said, "Mom, I could feel her like sobbing, and I went to let go and she pulled me closer." And I was like, I needed an Olivia, when
Yeah.
I was a kid. Those are the acts. And then my son, same thing, meeting him where he's at, he is highly sensitive. He had a very traumatic birth, which created a very hyperactive stress response. He was, colic his whole childhood. I wish, like his whole infancy, I wish I knew what I knew now then.
Yeah.
Um, and he's carried that with him. And, he'll say, like, Mom, can we do some neurosomatic tools? Or he'll notice when he wants to, like, do a wall push or a pillow slam to, like, deactivate all of the energy that's in his body. And then my husband, who's the last one on board, brings it in conversations now. And he even speaks some of the language of like the narratives that we have, that are happening and that are protective. And then we bring it into community. And like each of us now are bringing it into the school, into our work, into our leadership, into our friendships. And it's just such a gift. And if we aren't doing that, then really we are just mirroring and projecting our own wounds onto each other over and over again and harming humanity. Yeah.
Period. Literally.
Period.
Yeah,
Mic drop.
that's so huge. No, it truly it is. Like that's
It
literally
is.
it. Like we're all there's so many people like hello on the internet just walking around doing that constantly because we all have our own map of the world. We all have our own experiences. We all have our own programming. And if left to our own devices, that unconscious mind is going to keep running the show because that's what it's built to do. And it'll
Mhm.
keep you in a reactive state. It just will because it feels safe, it's protective. It's like, oh my God, we have to survive. That's literally it. So when we do this kind of work, like I always say this, our kids they don't do what we tell them, right?
Right.
They're not going to do what we tell them to do, but they will model and the better we are for ourselves, the more work that we do on ourselves and the more regulated that we are, the more
Mhm.
regulated they're going to be, just because that is how it works. Like literally they will pick up more of that just by us setting that stage, setting the energy, than anything else. Like it's so much more impactful. So the modeling is a really, really big piece of it as far as like the parenting of it. But even in just like you said, like out in the community, in the schools, and just everywhere you go. I mean, you can go into a store and you could be in the worst mood, but if people are smiling at you or someone's nice to you in the checkout or whatever, it does shift your state. And so I know it's hard to like sort of break out of that pattern, but when you do, it's kind of a snowball effect. And it's really awesome when, because you can feel it. Like you can feel it, like you're in more flow, things flow to you, like you are more receptive to all the abundance that you want and that's around you, but you're so closed off to it normally when you are living in that state of fight, flight, nervous system dysregulation, whatever you want to call it. So I think the best work that you can do is this kind of work because you are going to be a better human, parent, partner, coach, whatever. It was just
Only.
by design. And the ripple effect is really big. One person can really change. So I hope that you guys really get that because I know you've seen that in your work.
Yeah, it's huge. It's so huge, like one person can make a huge, huge, huge difference. It just multiplies. It multiplies and multiplies and multiplies.
Well, tell people a little bit about how they can find you if they want to look more into doing this kind of work and how you do this kind of work and where you like to connect with people before we wrap up. And I'll make sure I
Yeah.
put all this in the show notes as well.
So you can find me on beyondyourmindset.com, and also on Instagram at kathrynspears.co, where I drop lots of truth bombs and speak my unfiltered truth. And that's what I also love to help people do. I've now finally found a way to blend my beautiful past life that I burnt down in my marketing into my present line of work. And it's just such a beautiful ebb and flow of past life and present life, in like the truest self-expression. So Instagram, and find me at beyondyourmindset.com.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, you definitely stand in that. I love the messaging on your Instagram. I'm very much I don't know if it's partly this work coupled with the fact that like once you do hit like 50 and over, you really do. You're like, I just don't care anymore. Like
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm
It's
gonna
like,
say what I want.
yes. Yeah. And in a society where we were told to like sit still, don't be
Uh-huh.
too loud, use your indoor voice, like use your gentle little girl voice. It's like, no,
No.
this radical rebellion.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
have things we need to say. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's really important too, because I have a lot of women in my universe who tell me things, well, like, well, I want to be, professional or whatever. And I was like, you can still be professional and still be yourself, like kind of the whole vibe. Like in general, I really feel like, it's kind of like off topic, but not really. I do feel like we are and have been moving into a much more unapologetic space like that. And I'm all for it. Like I'm here for it.
Absolutely. And like truly behind every professional power suit is a human.
Uh-huh.
And we are all humans and we all have our own like quirks and things we like to do and say. And when we're showing up only in the power suit in one place and not the other, it's just like this fragmentation and this mask. And like we can wear the power suit and still be the human behind the power suit, you know?
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for being
you.
here, for having this chat with me. I could talk about this kind of stuff all day, every day. We could go like 12 layers deep with this, but I really appreciate you bringing this energy to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to chat with you.
Okay, so I hope you guys got a lot out of that episode. I know I did. I always love talking about any of this. Like I told her, I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. But I do want you guys to really kind of dig into this somatic piece of it. I am not certified in somatics, but because I was a massage therapist years and years ago, I've always been on that side of the fence, basically. Like you got to get your body on board because everything is connected. Everything is connected and we hold it in our bodies. And so I know that from doing body work on people in the past and also getting my own body work done consistently over the years, it's a very important piece of all of this for me. We're not just like, we don't want to just walk around just with our heads. We are attached to a body. So you really do need to consider all of that when you're looking into it. And, the other part of this too that I want to just make sure you guys hear is that sitting in the space of the uncomfortableness, a lot of people don't want to deal with it, can't deal with it, maybe because of just environmental things and, all of that. I totally get. But if you do have the capacity to look into it, if you do have the capacity to start getting curious about, I wonder what that trigger is about, or, I wonder why I am always in a reactive state, then I feel like that is a perfect little invitation for you to just take a step in that direction. It can be a small step. It can be reading a book. It could be listening to this podcast. It could be journaling about it. Open yourself up to it, and, you'll be surprised on what just sort of drops in. I'm a big believer that we are meant to find what we are meant to find at exactly the right time. Like, your timing is always perfect. So if this is intriguing to you, I say just, follow that inclination and look into it and see if there is something to it for you. And I hope, as always, that this episode was insightful and that it made some sort of impact in your life. And if it did, share it with a friend and let me know. But in general, thanks again for being here. I love you guys. I hope you have a fantastic week ahead.